Good afternoon. Over the last 2 days, we've said goodbye to some people who have been part of St. Peter's for a long time. Gladys Hasley, who was our oldest member at 98, and Larry Fole, who was 82. Please ask God to continue bringing comfort and peace to their family and friends. You can find their celebrations of life on our YouTube channel. This week in our one-year chronological Bible reading plan, we started hearing about Israel's kings, beginning with the intertwined stories of King Saul and David in 1 Samuel. Saul began well as a king, winning many battles against Israel's enemies, but he became arrogant and impatiently offered a sacrifice to God, which only a priest was to do. He also spared the life of the Amalekite king and kept the best of the plunder, which was to be completely destroyed. Samuel told Saul that God had rejected him and would seek out a man after his own heart. God then sent Samuel to Bethlehem to anoint one of the sons of Jesse as Israel's new king. The Lord did not choose any of Jesse's oldest 7 sons, but chose David, the youngest. God doesn't look at the outward appearance, but at the heart. When the Philistines were at war with the Israelites, a Philistine champion named Goliath would come out to challenge the Israelites to send out a man to fight him. Goliath was over 9 feet tall, an incredibly imposing warrior. All the Israelite soldiers trembled when they saw him and refused his challenge. But when David brought his brothers who were serving in the army some food, he volunteered to go up against Goliath. Saul offered him his own sword and armor, but they were too big for David. Instead, David chose 5 smooth stones and took his sling and went to face the giant. He said to Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord my God." He trusted that the God who delivered him from the bears and lions he had faced while defending the flocks would defend him against Goliath as well. The first stone that David slung sank into Goliath's forehead and he fell face down. David cut off Goliath's head with his own sword and presented it to Saul, but kept Goliath's armor in his own tent. The people celebrated David's victory and made Saul jealous by singing that Saul had killed thousands, but David had killed tens of thousands. David married Saul's daughter, Michal, but Saul's jealousy continued to grow as David's renown as a warrior spread. Even as David faithfully served him and won many battles, King Saul began scheming how he could get rid of David. He even tried to pin David to the wall with his spear when David played the harp for him. Saul's son, Jonathan, became fast friends with David and warned him when he found out that Saul was trying to kill David. Michal covered for David while he escaped one night. While on the run from Saul, David went to the priest at Nob, who gave him Goliath's sword and let him and his men eat the bread of the presence that had been set before the ark of the Lord. In the New Testament, David referred to that story when the Pharisees had expressed disdain at Jesus' disciples for taking and working to separate grain from the chaff and eating it on the Sabbath day of all days. David sought refuge in the Philistine town of Gath, where Goliath was from. When the Philistine king's generals shared their mistrust of David, David pretended to be insane, so the king sent him away. Then David fled into the wilderness and hid in a cave stronghold. Many men joined him, his brothers and other relatives, anyone who was in trouble or discontented, a ragtag army of 400 men. Later on, some great warriors from Judah joined him as well. While David was in the wilderness, his men protected the flocks and herds of a rich but harsh man named Nabal, which means fool. Rather than showing gratitude, Nabal insulted David. When Nabal's wife Abigail heard about it, she interceded with David, stopping him from taking revenge on Nabal and his family. When Nabal found out what had almost happened, he had a heart attack and died shortly afterward. Then David took Abigail as one of his wives. Saul had given his daughter Michal, who had been David's first wife, to another man. Later on, we'll see how having children with several different wives caused David a lot of trouble. King Saul viciously cut down anyone who supported David, including the priest at Nob and his whole family. God continued to use David and his men to save the Israelites from their enemies. Twice, David had opportunities to kill Saul, but refused to do so since Saul was the Lord's anointed. Each time, Saul admitted that David was in the right and promised to leave him alone. David decided to flee to the land of the Philistines again. He went back to Gath and settled there. He went out and raided towns near Shur in Egypt, but told the king of Gath that he was raiding towns in Israel. The king figured that David was making himself so odious to his people that he would be his servant forever. He gave David and his town the men of Ziklag. We also read a very interesting story about King Saul and the medium at Endor. It made me think of the Star Wars movie Return of the Jedi, where a battle is fought on the forested moon of the planet Endor. But that was a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's so interesting how often um, fantasy books and movies take some of their place names from the Bible. God did not answer Saul when he wanted advice about an upcoming battle, so he consulted a medium, which was forbidden by God's law, and had her call up the spirit of Samuel, who had died. The spirit told Saul that God had rejected him as king and that Saul and his sons would soon join him in the realm of the dead. When the Philistines went to attack Israel, the other leaders did not want David to come with them. Tomorrow, we'll read about how when he returned home, David found that his town had been raided and burned by Amalekites, and all of their wives and sons and daughters had been captured. They pursued the Amalekites, overtook and destroyed them, recovering everything and everyone that had been taken. The Psalms that we read this week were penned by David in response to times when he was fleeing from Saul and his enemies. It's interesting to read these songs along with the experiences that inspired them. In Psalm 56, David says, "In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, O God. I will present my thank offerings to you. For you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before you in the light of life." In the description of today's post, I am including a link to the Bible Project's guide to the books of Samuel. They share some great insights and links to other articles, videos, and podcasts about Saul and David. I hope to see you for worship this Sunday at 8:30 and 11. Sunday school and our adult class on the book of Genesis are at 9:45. Have a great week.